Welcome to Threads of Truth, the podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Today we're revisiting one of Australia's most enduring mysteries. A man found dead on a beach, no identity, no clear cause, and a code that puzzled investigators for decades, now re-examined through modern DNA breakthroughs.
You know, it's fascinating because for over 70 years, the public basically projected their ultimate espionage fantasies onto this guy.
Right.
People looked at the sparse evidence and constructed these wild narratives of international intrigue, Cold War operations, dashing secret agents. But modern forensic science has really forced us to pivot.
It really has.
We now have to examine the intensely human, profoundly troubled reality of a guy who seemingly went to extraordinary lengths to erase himself.
Exactly. And when you look through the massive stack of source materials you brought in for this exploration, you realize that giving this man a name didn't tie the narrative up neatly.
No, not at all.
Somehow, securing an identity just opened up a darker, more complex labyrinth. Our mission, as we walk through your sources today, is to reconstruct that original 1948 scene, dissect the actual science behind the forensic genealogy, and then examine the fierce pushback from online communities.
Yeah, because the internet is absolutely refusing to accept the case closed stamp on this one.
Right. And that skepticism is, well, it's totally warranted when you look at the raw data.
It is. The scientific achievement of extracting an identity from such degraded material is remarkable, but it leaves a wake of behavioral and historical impossibilities.
The forensic truth and the historical timeline are basically crashing into each other. So let's establish the physical reality of that. Imagine you're walking along Somerton Beach in Adelaide, Australia.
Right.
It's the morning of December 1st, 1948. The weather is warming up for the summer. And slumped against a concrete seawall is a man.
And, you know, two different couples had actually spotted him the previous evening around 7 o'clock and then later that night.
But they just assumed he was intoxicated, right? Like sleeping it off in the sand.
Exactly. But by morning, authorities are called, and a medical officer determines he's been dead since about 2 a.m. And the initial physiological assessment is what really seeded the mythology.
Oh, absolutely. He was a man in his 40s, about 5'11", in absolute peak physical condition.
Yeah, with ginger hair graying at the temples, gray-blue eyes. But the coroner specifically noted the man's calf muscles.
Right, the calf.
They were highly developed, described in the notes as resembling a ballet dancer or someone used to wearing high-heeled pointed shoes.
And that single anatomical detail just sent the public imagination spiraling. You read those early press clippings, and people are instantly speculating about, like, touring Russian ballet companies.
Oh, definitely.
But if we pull back from the romantic theories and look at his clothing, a much more chilling, methodical picture emerges. Because he's lying on a warm beach wearing a heavy double-breasted jacket, a suit, and a tie.
Which is unusual enough for the weather.
Right. But the mechanical alteration of that clothing is what makes it a deliberate puzzle. Every single identifying manufacturer's label had been meticulously removed from his garments.
Yeah, and the mechanics of that removal are crucial. This wasn't just, a hasty tearing of fabric.
No, not at all.
Whoever did this used a tool, probably a seam ripper or small scissors, to painstakingly unpick the tiny, tight stitches holding the tags to the shirts and the trousers.
Which is wild, because in 1938, clothing labels were basically geographical trackers, right?
Exactly. They indicated the specific local tailor or department store where an item was bought. Law enforcement routinely used them to trace missing persons to a specific city or neighborhood.
So I look at that deliberate act of unpicking those seams, and I compare it to sweeping away your own footprints in the snow while you're still walking.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
It's a highly conscious, labor-intensive effort to just vanish.
Yeah.
And his pockets offered nothing to counter that.
Right, just everyday stuff. Cigarettes, matches, juicy fruit gum, 2 combs.
An unused train ticket to Henley Beach, and a used bus ticket. But no wallet.
No wallet, no pass.
No keys. He had effectively sanitized himself.
And that sanitation extended beyond his immediate person, too. Because a month into the investigation, detectives located an unclaimed brown suitcase at the Adelaide railway station.
Checked into the cloakroom the day before he was found, right?
Yep. roughly 11 in the morning on November 30th. And your sources detail the contents of that suitcase, and it is just a masterclass in contradiction.
It really is. They found a shaving brush, shoe polish, a knife, a screwdriver, and this custom handmade toolkit.
But more importantly, they found clothing. And this is where the label removal theory hits a massive snag.
Right, because while the clothes on his body were stripped of identity, some items in the suitcase retained name tags bearing the name T. Keene, or just Keene.
And they also found a spool of barber's orange thread.
Which is the forensic anchor, isn't it?
It is. Barber's thread was a very specific, high-quality waxed thread, not commonly available in post-war Australia because of rationing.
Oh.
And that exact thread had been used to repair a pocket seam in the trousers the dead man was wearing. It completely confirmed the suitcase was his.
But then, why leave the T. Keene tags? It introduces this incredibly complex layer of behavioral psychology. It has to be misdirection.
Oh, it functions perfectly as misdirection.
Mhm.
The police spent weeks searching missing persons registries across English-speaking countries for a T. Keene matching his description.
And they found absolutely no one.
Exactly. Whoever packed that suitcase deliberately left those tags intact while surgically removing the labels from the clothes he wore to the beach.
It suggests he was anticipating the investigation. But honestly, the suitcase misdirection pales in comparison to the artifact they found months later.
Yeah, the investigation had effectively stalled until May 1949. That's when pathologist John Cleland did a secondary examination of the clothing.
And men's trousers in the 40s often had a fob pocket, right? Like a tiny pouch in the waistband for a pocket watch.
Right. And deep inside the specific fob pocket, tightly rolled into a tiny cylinder, Cleland discovered a scrap of paper.
Printed on this paper were two words in a highly distinct font. Tamám Shud.
Which is a phrase from the Persian language translating literally to, it is finished or ended.
You literally cannot design a more evocative clue.
Yeah.
A man erases his identity, goes to a beach, dies, and hides a secret message saying, it is ended.
It's unbelievable. So authorities brought in linguistic experts. They identified the paper and the font as being torn from the final page of a very specific, rare edition of a 12th century book of Persian poetry.
The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam.
Yes. Translated by Edward Fitzgerald. And the themes of the book are heavily existential. The fleeting nature of life, the inevitability of death, fatalistic acceptance.
So the police launched a nationwide appeal to find the book with the missing page.
And remarkably, it worked. A man in Glenelg, the suburb right next to Somerton Beach, came forward.
He said he found a copy of that exact edition tossed into the back seat of his unlocked car around the time of the death.
Right, his car was parked near the beach. They examined the book, and the tear pattern perfectly matched the Tamám Shud scrap.
And that physical match is what shifted the case to a national security issue. Right. Because of what was inside the book.
Exactly. Inside the back cover, investigators found faint pencil impressions. Someone had used it as a notepad, revealing 5 lines of capital letters.
Sequences that didn't form recognized words. And the second line was struck through, which is a common self-correction in cryptography.
When you look at the images of that code, it screams military cipher. It looks like a one-time pad encryption used by intelligence agencies.
And alongside the code were 2 phone numbers. One was unlisted, traced to a young nurse named Jessica Thompson,
who lived on Mosley Street in Glenelg, just a 5-minute walk from where the body was found.
And the police interview with her, they called her Justin for years to protect her identity, is heavily scrutinized.
Oh, absolutely. Detective Sergeant Lionel Lean showed her a plaster death mask they had cast from the man's face.
And her reaction totally betrayed her testimony. The records say she looked completely horrified, like she was about to faint. She literally had to look away.
But then she adamantly stated she had never seen him before. She did admit to giving a copy of the Rubaiyat to an army lieutenant named Alf Boxall during the war.
But they found Boxall alive and well in Sydney, and he still had his copy of the book.
Right. The authorities failing to press Jessica Thompson harder is incredibly frustrating historically. But you have to remember the geopolitical atmosphere in late 1948.
It was the height of Cold War paranoia, the Soviet blockade of Berlin. Plus, South Australia was a hub for classified intelligence.
Exactly. The Woomera rocket testing range, a joint Anglo-Australian weapons project, was highly active. There were strategic uranium mines nearby.
So look at the puzzle pieces. An unidentified, fit man, clothes stripped of trackers, an untraceable code in a discarded book, an unlisted number of a nearby nurse who nearly faints at his face.
And a total lack of physical trauma or known disease, which reinforced the espionage theory.
Right, because the coroner, Thomas Erskine Cleland, suspected poisoning, but standard toxicology found nothing.
Which led him to hypothesize an undetectable volatile poison, like strophanthin, which induces heart failure and breaks down rapidly, leaving no trace.
An undetectable poison near a military intelligence hub. The public felt the conclusion was obvious. Soviet spy.
Or a Western counterintelligence agent eliminated in a covert strike. Naval cryptographers spent years on those 5 lines and couldn't crack them.
So the body was buried with a headstone that just said, "Here lies the unknown man who was found at Somerton Beach." The trail went frozen.
Until the evolution of genomic sequencing. Which brings us to Professor Derek Abbott at the University of Adelaide and forensic genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick.
The mechanics of how they pull DNA from this are just fascinating, because Abbott realized that when they made that plaster mask in 1949, they accidentally trapped dozens of his hairs in the plaster.
Right. Abbott petitioned for years and finally got access to about 50 hairs, but the scientific hurdles were monumental.
Because getting DNA from hair without the root is already hard, usually only yielding mitochondrial DNA.
Exactly. But these hairs were entombed in plaster, and to separate them without breaking the hair, previous researchers had treated them with sodium hypochlorite.
Which is bleach.
Yes. And sodium hypochlorite aggressively attacks the DNA molecule's backbone, shattering it into highly degraded fragments.
So they were trying to sequence a genome from material systematically destroyed by the chemicals used to preserve it.
Exactly. And this is where we have to explain the concept of imputation. It's the cornerstone of both their triumph and the intense public skepticism you see online.
Right. Think of it like a massive 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. But you only have 400 pieces because of water damage. Imputation isn't physically finding the missing pieces.
No, it's taking the pieces you have, laying them out, and using statistical algorithms to compare your incomplete puzzle against tens of thousands of completed ones in a database.
The math predicts, with high probability, what your missing pieces look like.
That's a perfect analogy. The algorithms look at surviving genetic markers and infer the unobserved variants. Once they reconstructed enough of the genome, they uploaded it to GEDmatch,
which is the open source database where people put their raw DNA files from ancestry sites so they can search for shared DNA segments.
Right. They found distant cousins, triangulated matches, built a family tree of 4,000 people going back to the early 19th century.
And after a decade of eliminating branches, in 2022, they announced with 99.9% confidence that the Somerton Man was Carl Webb, often called Charles.
Born in 1905 near Melbourne, a 43-year-old electrical engineer and instrument maker.
Which instantly grounds one anomaly. The handmade toolkit wasn't spy gear, it was the customized equipment of a precision instrument maker.
Exactly. And concurrently, the South Australian police officially exhumed his skeletal remains in 2021 for their own DNA testing.
So on paper, the ghost has a name, a birth date, a profession. But when you look at communities like Reddit's r/mysteries of the world, they are celebrating. They are scrutinizing everything.
Because establishing Carl Webb shattered the existing mythos, but introduced chronological and behavioral anomalies that are arguably more baffling than the spy stuff.
Right. First, it completely ruined the love affair theory, which posited Webb was the biological father of Jessica Thompson's son, Robin.
People debated the physical resemblances for years. Ear structure traits, missing teeth traits.
And the absolute peak irony is that Professor Abbott actually married Rachel Egan, who is Robin Thompson's daughter. He married the woman everyone suspected was the Somerton Man's granddaughter.
But the DNA proved conclusively that Carl Webb had absolutely no genetic relationship to Robin Thompson. The biological link was a phantom.
But the online sleuths quickly pointed out gaping holes. For instance, the police finished their forensic exam of the exhumed remains in late 2023, yet they have maintained total silence.
Right. There's been no official coronial declaration confirming Carl Webb is the Somerton Man. That institutional silence fuels the skepticism.
Critics focus on that imputation process. They argue that relying on computationally predicted DNA from bleached hair is crossing the line from empirical proof to sophisticated guesswork.
Because the original sample was so minuscule, there's nothing left for independent verification. People are asking, is the coroner silent because the pristine DNA from the exhumed femur didn't match the imputed DNA?
Which is a staggering implication.
Yeah.
But even if the science is flawless, the circumstantial evidence makes his anonymity inexplicable. We have to talk about the family recognition anomaly.
Oh, this is the detail that defies all logical human behavior. Carl Webb had multiple living siblings in Melbourne in 1948.
And the media coverage was unprecedented. His postmortem photos and the death mask were on the front pages nationwide, shown in cinema newsreels.
How does an entire family fail to recognize their own brother dominating the national conversation?
It makes no sense. And it gets sharper when we re-examine the suitcase. It had clothes tagged T. Keene.
Well, Carl Webb had a sister named Frida, and Frida was married to a man whose legal name was Thomas Keene, T. Keene.
That is insane. The statistical probability of randomly adopting your brother-in-law's exact name is basically zero. Those were hand-me-downs.
Almost certainly.
I just have to push on this. We are asked to believe that Frida Keene sees this dead man's face in the paper, reads that his suitcase contains T. Keene clothing, and she never contacts the authorities.
It suggests a level of deliberate estrangement that is just staggering.
It borders on sociopathic.
If they recognized him and chose to remain silent, it implies Carl Webb was someone they actively wanted to be permanently rid of.
Right. And then there's the temporal anomaly. Public records show he vanished from Melbourne in April 1947.
An 18-month gap before he washes up dead in December 1948. Where was he? How was he living? No employment records, no addresses.
This vacuum makes researchers re-examine Jessica Thompson, the nurse. If they weren't lovers, why did an unemployed engineer have her unlisted number?
Well, consider the pharmacology. The coroner suspected undetectable poison. Thompson, as a nurse, had intimate knowledge of pharmacology and access to restricted compounds.
So online sleuths hypothesize a transactional relationship. He sought her out for the means to end his life.
If she supplied him with a volatile barbiturate, her panic at seeing the death mask aligns perfectly. Recognizing him would implicate her in a fatal, illegal transaction.
Her near-fainting spell was just self-preservation. It strips away the glamour completely. And when we look at the historical archives regarding his character, it gets even darker.
Right. Peter Bowes, host of the blog The Somerton Man, unearthed a sworn legal affidavit from Carl's estranged wife, Dorothy Webb, filed in 1951 for divorce.
And she paints him as a deeply volatile, violent, miserable man.
She detailed how he'd fallen to silence for days. He was intensely miserly, demanding her wages. He was a chronic gambler who got physically aggressive when he lost.
And the escalation is terrifying. In 1945, after a gambling loss, he grabbed a carving knife and threatened a guest in their home.
He had zero friends. He engaged in obsessive habits like going to bed at 7 every single night.
The physical trauma was severe. He locked her out, struck her hard enough to knock her across the room. When she asked about her sick cat, he tried to stab her with a fork and kicked her spine.
The police were summoned multiple times, and amidst this, Dorothy provided a detail that rewrites the coroner's report. He wrote poetry obsessively.
Specifically about death, claiming it was his greatest desire.
And critically, she documented a near-fatal suicide attempt in March 1946.
Right, she came home to find him rambling. The apartment reeked of ether so badly that neighbors complained.
Ether is a highly volatile anesthetic, and he confessed he had also taken 40 phenobarbital tablets.
A massive deliberate overdose. He only survived because Dorothy spent a week hand-feeding him, and then he berated her for saving him.
So we aren't looking at a Soviet assassination. We're looking at a severely depressed, abusive man with a history of using complex chemical cocktails to attempt suicide.
But this raises a massive contradiction. If he just wanted to die, why engage in the theatrical complexity of removing every label, checking a decoy suitcase, and hiding a Persian poem?
I know, it requires significant cognitive organization, which severe depression usually degrades.
Exactly. Does a guy who goes to bed at 7 p.m. really possess the executive function to orchestrate a multi-location scavenger hunt? Isn't the internet just retrofitting a cool narrative onto a messy reality?
It's a critical point. But we have to look at the Webb family's background. They had deep ties to the J.C. Williamson Theatre Company,
which was a titan of the Australian entertainment industry. They controlled theaters across the continent.
Right. Webb grew up surrounded by stagecraft and public performance. Sociologists suggest his final act was heavily influenced by this. It wasn't just suicide, it was a mystery play.
A mystery play. So the label removal and the scrap weren't spy tradecraft, but the stage directions of a poet curating his own legacy.
He wanted his absence to be loudly felt. It aligns with his obsessive death poetry. And from this perspective, the five-line code isn't a military cipher.
Researchers think it might be an acrostic, a transliterated death poem mirroring Omar Khayyam.
Or, given his severe gambling addiction, the letters could just be a tracking ledger for horse racing bets. Professor Abbott noted the letter frequencies correlate strongly with local racehorses of that era.
The idea that a code that stumped international intelligence for 70 years might just be a suicidal gambling addict's betting ledger it perfectly encapsulates the tragedy.
It really does. But as we pivot from Carl Webb, we encounter a secondary mystery involving his wife, Dorothy.
Yes, her trajectory is incredibly unsettling. She reverted to her maiden name, Robertson, and moved to a tiny town called Bute in South Australia.
Which is just 89 miles from Adelaide, where Carl was found dead.
That proximity is so suspicious. Was he hunting her down? In 1951, she officially filed for divorce, citing desertion. The next year, she remarried a man named Geoffrey Lockyer.
But in 1955, just 3 years later, Geoffrey Lockyer initiated divorce proceedings against her, and the grounds he cites were habitual cruelty.
The documented victim of Carl's violence was now legally accused of habitual cruelty herself. It highlights the devastating cycle of abuse.
But the mechanics of this 1955 divorce are bizarre. Sociologist Mohammed Tamgidi found that moments before the final order was issued, Lockyer's counsel submitted a highly specific request.
He demanded a clause stating the action had not abated by reason of the death of the defendant. He forced the court to finalize the divorce even if Dorothy had just died.
Right. You don't proactively file a motion anticipating your spouse's death on the day of the divorce without knowing about an impending fatal medical crisis or something darker.
And she supposedly had an appendectomy around this time. Following the surgery and this weird legal finalization, Dorothy effectively ceases to exist in public records.
Vanished completely. No electoral entries, no property records, and critically, no death certificate exists for her in any registry.
In a modern bureaucratic state, that requires systematic interference. This is where Tamgidi points to Dorothy's father, John Comer Robertson.
A highly decorated WWI veteran with immense social standing.
Right. The theory is that if Dorothy died under scandalous circumstances, her father leveraged his influence to scrub her death from the record to protect the family.
Specifically his other daughter, Phyllis. You have one daughter tied to the Somerton Man scandal and then dying during a scandalous second divorce. He just makes the paper trail vanish.
Which brings us full circle to the deafening silence from the South Australian coroner today. If they confirm Abbott's findings, they didn't just find Carl Webb.
Exactly. They stumbled into the heavily protected trauma of the Robertson family, unearthing a history of domestic violence, institutional cover-ups, and living descendants whom might be unaware.
The coroner's silence might just be an abundance of ethical caution. It makes you realize the limitation of forensic genealogy. It only answers who.
Right. It establishes his presence on the beach, but it can't answer why he was there or what emotional calculus drove him to tear those labels off. Identity is a biological fact, but the motivation is an impenetrable mystery.
The revelation didn't resolve the story. It just excavated the collateral damage he left behind. The vanished wife, the silent siblings. Beneath the spy thriller, we just found severe mental illness and profound human isolation.
It's a stark reminder that demanding answers to historical enigmas means accepting the gritty, uncinematic trauma at the core.
Which leaves us with a highly provocative ethical question. It revolves around the concept of the right to be forgotten. Carl Webb spent his final hours meticulously unpicking every thread connecting him to society.
He weaponized obscurity. He demanded to be anonymous.
Yet that desperate act of self-erasure became the catalyst for a 70-year global obsession. Millions scrutinized his autopsy photos, and ultimately society used the microscopic hairs he couldn't scrub away to forcefully rip away the anonymity he died trying to secure.
By trying to be nobody, he transformed into one of the most analyzed individuals in history.
Does applying modern science to solve a mystery sometimes constitute a violation of the dead's final, silent wish? It's a complex question to keep in mind the next time you look at a newly solved cold case. Next time, we travel back to 1946 Texas, where a quiet night turned into terror when a masked figure attacked a sleeping town and vanished without a trace, becoming known as the Phantom Killer.